My name is Phil Heaton. I'm the Interim Programme Manager of the SEUPB's Managing Authority. I'm very pleased to welcome you all today to today's webinar, where we'll be celebrating the achievements and reflecting on the lessons learned of the Victims and Survivors theme. Joining us to do so are Victims and Survivors Commissioner Ian Jeffers, Andrew Walker, CEO of the Victims and Survivors Service, and Glenn Donnelly of RSM UK, whose evaluation of the Peace 4 programme included a case study on this theme. A particularly warm welcome to the three of you. Before we get underway, I have a few technical notes. First of all, to ensure best performance of Zoom, we recommend that you close all tabs and any program likely to drain your bandwidth. We also recommend that you use Safari or Chrome while watching today's session. If you do experience any issues, please visit our social media channels where the live viewing link can be accessed. And should you need to contact anyone at SEUPB, please email communications@seupb.eu if you have any issues. There is no need to switch off your microphone or cameras today, as we will not be taking any spoken questions from the floor during the workshop. The chat function will similarly not be in use. However, if you are listening to the presentations and if you have questions, then we would really like to receive them so that we can put them to our panel during agenda item 4. And to send us your questions, you will need to log into Slido. If you've never used Slido before, then it is very simple to use. All you need to do is go to slido.com, enter the codes that you see on the screen here, and then go to the box and then enter that in the box called Join as Participant. Alternatively, you can scan the QR code that you see on your screen now, and this will also take you to that page where you enter in the code. And once you're there, you'll be able to put your questions to our presenters throughout the event. I reiterate that we really would like you to log into Slido and send us your questions so that we can really take full advantage of the insights and observations of our guest speakers and our evaluation expert during the panel discussion at the end of the webinar. This event is being recorded, and by registering, you've agreed for us to send you the link to the event once it's uploaded on our YouTube channel. And finally, I should mention that that the final evaluation report on the impact of our Victims and Survivors theme is still being finalised. Therefore, the findings presented during agenda item 3, these are emerging findings at this stage. Definitive findings will be shared with programme bodies and departments in advance of publication and will be published in full on SEUPB's website once the full and final report is completed. So I will shortly be handing over to Glenn Donnelly of RSM, who, as well as sharing the evaluation findings, will also be the moderator of today's event. But first, there will be a short video from SEUPB's Chief Executive, Gina McIntyre. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gina McIntyre and I'm the Chief Executive of the Theme Programmes Body. I'm delighted to welcome you today to this virtual Peace 4 Impact Evaluation session to hear more about the positive impact of the Shared Spaces Victims and Survivors project. This online session will give you an insight into the fantastic and vital work that has been done by the Victims and Survivors Services in Northern Ireland, VSS. We want to ensure that this session will also provide some best practice and lessons learned that can be taken forward into our new programme, Peace Plus. The aim of the Peace 4 programme in this area is to add value by investing in cross-border health and wellbeing services that develop proven expertise within the programme area. It was also to increase the capacity and the quality of care in the sector for victims and survivors and their families. The VSS have done a fantastic job in delivering on the objectives I've just mentioned, and congratulations to everyone involved. And in particular, I would like to pay tribute to all of the participants who took part in the programme. They were very brave, they came forward, and they were very open about some of the issues they had. Key findings from the case studies of the evaluation has found that Peace 4 support for VSS activities has had a transformational influence on how the organisation delivers services to victims and survivors. And with the help of the Peace 4 funding, the VSS changed the delivery model to a more individual and victim-centred approach, providing tailored one-to-one support and advice for individuals. This vital work that has been done by VSS has complemented other work being taken forward by other agencies to deliver on the commitments for victims and survivors. And I'd like to take the time to acknowledge the ongoing support provided by the Executive Office in Northern Ireland and the Department of Rural and Community Development in Ireland, who work so closely with us on this theme. The EU, the UK Government and the Government of Ireland and the Northern Ireland Executive are continuing to support the work within the Peace and the Interreg programme, which we also manage, in the new Peace Plus programme, which is worth €1.1 billion. It has been approved by the Northern Ireland Executive, the Government of Ireland, the North-South Ministerial Council, and it has just been adopted by the European Commission. And we've commenced with pre-development workshops to assist organisations to develop and design projects in readiness for funding calls for Peace Plus, which we hope will come later this year. The new programme features 6 themes, all with a focus on peace and prosperity and addressing rural issues in particular. It aims to leave a lasting legacy across Northern Ireland and the border counties. And theme 4, healthy and inclusive communities, has 25 million allocated for victims and survivors specifically. Funding calls for Peace Plus, as I said, we hope will open later this year. And in the meantime, please do look at our social media and our website and follow the information about the pre-development workshops so that you will be ready for when the calls do. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope that you really enjoy this online session.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to welcome everybody to this morning's session. My name is Glenn Donnelly. I'm Associate Director at RSM UK, and as Phil mentioned, I'm going to be moderating the session today. Just to quickly run through our agenda for this morning. We've just had an introduction and housekeeping from Phil and a welcome from Gina, SEUPB's Chief Executive. We'll soon have a keynote address coming up from the Commissioner for Victim Survivors, Ian Jeffers, followed by some insights for the Victim Survivor Service Project by Andrew Walker, the Interim Chief Executive of VSS. We'll then touch on the evaluation and some emerging findings before opening the discussion through a panel Q&A. I'd just like to take this opportunity to remind everybody that if you would like to ask a question, then please do so at any time using Slido, using the code at the bottom of this screen, or if you have your phone handy, you can scan the QR code. I'm just going to give a very quick demonstration on how to access Slido to get onto this. So if you load up your browser and go to slido.com, it'll open this landing page. Sorry. Slido.com, it'll open a landing page in which you enter your participant code. This morning, we're using the code 2799639, which will then bring you to our victim survivor session questions, at which point you just type your question at the top. If you want to, you can add your name and hit send, and then that'll come through to our panel. So at this point, I'd like to now introduce our keynote speaker, Ian Jeffers, the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors. So Ian has been in senior leadership roles in the private and voluntary trust sector for more than 25 years. He started with the Prince's Trust as the Northern Ireland Director and concluded his 12 years with the charity as Deputy Chief Executive. As part of his role as Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, he has responsibility to advise the Secretary of State, the Executive Committee of the Assembly, and any body or person involved in providing services for victims and survivors on matters concerning the interests of victim survivors. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Ian.
Thank you. Good morning, all. And Glenn, thanks for the introduction. And Gina and Phil, thank you for this opportunity to say a few words this morning. Now, I'm merely the warm-up act, if you like, for VSS and RSM. So you have to put up with me for about the next 15 minutes or so. But in that time, what I'd like to do is touch on the wider context in which the Peace 4 Victims and Survivors programme has sought to enhance the health and well-being of many individuals and families and communities affected by the Troubles. I want to highlight how some of our research findings and recommendations are informing key services and how this is enhancing current understanding, particularly of the transgenerational impacts of the conflict legacy and increasing knowledge of the collective needs of victims and survivors. And as you're aware, the Commission had the opportunity to deliver a comprehensive research programme under the Peace 4 Victims and Survivors programme. And we've delivered significant research studies in the areas of psychological trauma services, advocacy support services, and deepening understanding of the transgenerational impacts of the conflict. Additionally, the Commission has had the opportunity to conduct a review of the ongoing needs of victims and survivors in Northern Ireland, alongside exploring the issues of individuals and families affected by their experience of the Troubles in Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland. Now, before I reflect on this work, it's worth pausing and considering the current environment we all find ourselves in as we collectively seek to improve and enhance the support for victims and survivors. Now, I haven't checked the news in the last hour or so, so I think we still have a Prime Minister. But let's be really honest with ourselves. We have a dysfunctional government, locally and nationally. Close to home, we have no political leadership, and it looks like we're heading towards another election, which will change nothing and potentially open up more division between our political parties and communities than we've seen in the last maybe 25 years. In Westminster, we have a Conservative government struggling with a new leader, an inbox that includes the protocol, cost of living crisis, financial stability, to name just 3 things. And in my opinion, we have a government that thinks the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill will cure everything on this side of the Irish Sea. Closer to home, we must reflect on what Stephen Farry referred to over the summer as casual sectarianism and the impact this is having on community relations in general and reconciliation in particular. It seems that nearly every day now we have a headline about some group or other singing rebel songs without any understanding of the consequences, or we have another news headline about state collusion or whitewashing the past and rewriting history. I leave you to judge if this is casual sectarianism, or is it a byproduct of failing to address the legacy of our past. So today, as we come to reflect on the fantastic work that is being delivered for victims and survivors, we must do so against this background of uncertainty and continued political and community division. Now, I say this not to depress us, but rather to challenge us as we seek to shape and improve things for all victims and survivors as part of a civilized, forward-looking society, trying to build a better future for all our citizens. So let me reflect on the funded research that many of you have been involved in. And so doing, let me start with a heartfelt thanks to the research teams at Queen's University and Ulster University, as well as the Commission staff and all of those that have supported this body of work. Thank you for your dedication in producing high quality, informative, useful research in incredibly challenging times. Now, in 2021, the Commission asked a series of questions of the Northern Ireland population relating to the continued impact of the legacy of the conflict. 24%, nearly a quarter of the population, said they met the legal definition of a victim or survivor. And while this figure, a quarter, stated that their mental or physical health has been affected by their experience of the Troubles, almost half of those who said their mental health was affected said it continued to be affected today. And in terms of legacy issues, 88% of the population said that it was important to address the legacy of the past, and 2/3 of the population stated that they were not supportive of a statute of limitations or an amnesty for conflict-related offences. These responses provide a clear illustration of the Northern Ireland population perspective on the continuing impact of conflict legacy issues on the lives and well-being of many individuals and families, including our young people throughout Northern Ireland and indeed the border counties. With the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement approaching, the responses provide us a stark and timely reminder of the enduring and unresolved nature of dealing with our troubled past and the continued complex challenges involved in so doing. Now, they're the conditions that the research programme and the wider Peace for Victims and Survivors programme were undertaken. Individually and collectively, the research projects aligned to the central objective of improving the health and well-being of victims and survivors, with a focus on targeting hard-to-reach and marginalised individuals and communities affected by conflict legacy. Equally, each of the 4 studies sought to make an important contribution to building a better future. The first piece of research looking at advocacy support services, the complex and frustrating challenges encountered by community-based colleagues committed to supporting families in their pursuit of truth, justice and accountability were reflected in the Advocacy Support Services report. The study highlighted the importance of valuing the work of the Peace 4 funded advocacy caseworkers with continued support provided through appropriate resourcing. The report recognized the difficulties involved in supporting victims and survivors through the long-term systemic delays within the current historical investigation and information recovery processes, yet at the same time seeking to empower them towards a form of self-advocacy. The study provided a timely reminder of the unacceptable and cruel treatment experienced by an aging profile of victims and their families, often seeking to access proper investigation into the death of a loved one. Now, whatever the new legacy bill looks like, if the Troubles bill is passed or not, findings and recommendations from this research can support the continued development and delivery of effective advocacy services through the caseworker network in the years ahead. The second piece of research, conflict, trauma, and mental health study, against the backdrop of a significant number of individuals and families still living with Troubles-related mental health issues. This study, which was produced by Queen's and other partners, reaffirmed through the voice of service users and trauma-focused practitioners the critical importance of timely and effective access to psychological therapy, treatment, and support. In addressing the recognized high prevalence of conflict-related PTSD, clinical depression, anxiety, and substance dependency in the local population, the studies delivered significant findings and recommendations that can enhance existing and future therapy-based treatments for individuals and families across the region. There are many recommendations which I'll not go into this morning within the research, but they can and they will enhance the development of the regional trauma network, of which we all look forward. Third piece of research, titled "It Didn't End in 1998, the Year of the Good Friday Agreement." Now, as Victims Commissioner, the continued existence of both Loyalist and Republican paramilitary groupings is of utmost concern. Paramilitary groups claiming to provide community protection have been responsible for over 150 murders and subjecting thousands of individuals, including children and young people, to brutal, life-changing attacks since 1998. In concluding their report at the end of last year, the Independent Reporting Commission stated that paramilitarism remains a clear and present danger. My simple reading of this analysis is that the lives of many individuals and their families, their community, and indeed wider society continues to be threatened with murder, injury, intimidation, and exploitation on a daily basis from the curse of paramilitarism. Young people can easily fall under the control of these groups through coercion or the offer of a sense of identity based on some romanticized past that never existed. The influence of paramilitarism as a transgenerational impact of the Troubles legacy was one of the several key themes explored in the report It Didn't End in 1988. And through the study, the voices of over 100 young people based in different parts of Northern Ireland and the border region were listened to and heard in reflecting their views on conflict-related themes. These included segregation, sectarianism, paramilitary violence, as well as learning about the past and culture and identity, whilst also identifying perceived gaps in mental health services. The findings and recommendations from the study offer a rich set of data in support of the ongoing work of health and wellbeing caseworkers and others in the sector who directly work with young people and their families affected by the conflict's legacy. Equally, young people's feedback in the report provides timely data to inform the development of care pathways for young people and families requiring access to the specialist regional trauma network in the months ahead. Now, I'm pleased to confirm today that the Commission will shortly be starting a process to establish a permanent young persons panel that will ensure the voice of young people living with the legacy of the Troubles will be heard in all our work going forward. Now, this is totally separate to our Victims and Survivors Forum, of which I will be updating how we're taking that forward to the next stages in the next few weeks. Final piece of research, Better Together study, talking to victims and survivors in GB and the the Republic of Ireland. Now, reflect back to the Commission's population survey. 83% of the Northern Ireland population agreed that victims and survivors of the Troubles living in Great Britain should be able to access the same services and support as those living here in Northern Ireland. 69% of the Northern Ireland population agreed that this should be the case for victims and survivors living in the Republic of Ireland. The new Victims and Survivors strategy under development provides an important opportunity for a renewed focus on addressing the needs of victims and survivors based on all parts of these islands. It's important, of course, to acknowledge and commend the vitally important work undertaken by the Peace Corps funded advocacy and health and wellbeing caseworkers who support victims and survivors throughout Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but also to reflect that we need to do more. The Better Together report highlighted several key concerns expressed by victims and survivors based outside of Northern Ireland. The report found that among the victims and survivors based in those jurisdictions, there was a perceived lack of parity with individuals affected by the Troubles and the conflict here in Northern Ireland. The study discovered that health and well-being, as well as truth, justice, and acknowledgement, remain the predominant areas of needs for victims and survivors outside of here. However, for those affected by long-standing, often traumatic experiences of the past, there was feelings expressed that they were forgotten or invisible or less equitably treated. It's therefore incumbent upon us all moving forward into the new strategy and under Peace Plus programme to ensure victims and survivors, no matter where they live, receive the empathy, treatment and support of governments and wider civic society to meet their needs while promoting reconciliation. On the subject of reconciliation, it's worth briefly reflecting upon its importance from the perspective of building a better future for victims and survivors and wider society in Northern Ireland and indeed relations across the islands. It's certainly a term that has gained resonance in recent months with the passing of Her Majesty the Queen and how different acts and words from the monarch and others have been viewed as making a significant contribution towards reconciliation. But of course, we have the legacy legislation currently moving through the House of Lords, and to give it its proper title, the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill. Now, the introduction of a piece of legacy almost 7 years since the signing of the Stormont House Agreement should be welcomed. But I don't see any reconciliation in this bill. It's evident that the bill's primary intentions leave many people feeling completely dismayed, hurt, and angry with the government's approach. The Commission continue to believe that the Legacy Bill is not victims and survivors centred and is fundamentally flawed in either dealing with legacy or in supporting reconciliation in Northern Ireland or across these islands. More broadly, the unpopular and misguided approach adopted by the UK government is indicative of recent comments by former Presbyterian moderator Dr. Norman Hamilton, who stated that the Good Friday Belfast Agreement had failed to bring reconciliation to this land and to our people. Dr. Hamilton went on to question, in the absence of a clear policy, what politicians from across the islands actually mean when they refer to reconciliation. From the perspective of victims and survivors, they should be able to look to their politicians and leaders for a clear and shared vision. To quote Dr. Hamilton again, our politicians should be setting out what reconciliation is and the steps needed to make it happen. That's a challenge for us all. And should it not be the thing that we're demanding and working to support, setting out what reconciliation is and the steps needed to make it happen? Before I close, let me quickly outline 3 challenges for us to look to as we consider this next round of funding. 3 simple things that have come up as I've looked at all of the research that I think we need to address and have open conversations about. Firstly, simply data. The data on victims and survivors has been hard to get, but through the work of the Victims and Survivors Service, the Regional Trauma Network, and the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme, there's an opportunity now to better coordinate this and enhance our understanding of the actual or close to actual numbers coming forward for assistance. In the background, we must continue population survey work routinely in the years ahead, and immediately we should be doing survey work in Republic of Ireland and Great Britain to better understand levels of need and access to services and so forth. The second area to watch out for is engagement. We've 25 years after the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, we're still unclear how many victims and survivors do not engage with any of the support mechanisms. We also don't know if this is good or bad. In other words, if people moved on or found closure, they don't need to or don't want to engage, or do they not know how to engage, or do they not engage for personal reasons or geographical reasons? There's a timely argument in supporting measures of reconciliation to actively encourage victims and survivors to come forward and create a formalised strategic plan in each jurisdiction, Northern Ireland, GB, and the Republic of Ireland, that is interlinked and prioritises access to funding and support services across the statutory sector so that their needs can effectively be met. It hasn't happened before across the jurisdictions, and it is long overdue. The third and final thing is we need to recognise that there is a lack of understanding, indeed maybe even a lack of interest outside of this network about the need to support victims and survivors and the importance that this plays in the wider reconciliation challenge. At the very least, victims and survivors' voices should be heard, ensuring that all protagonists remain fully committed to the principles of democratic and exclusively peaceful means of resolving political issues in the future. In closing, it's evident while there's still work to be done in addressing the legacy of the past and building a better future for victims and survivors, both here inside Northern Ireland and beyond, the Peace 4 programme has made a significant contribution to the well-being of many people across these islands. The many findings and recommendations across each of the research studies will continue to inform key service, policy and research developments in the months and years ahead. And Peace Plus will give us all a renewed opportunity to continue this important work to improve the lives of victims and survivors and the communities in which they live. The Commission certainly looks forward to continuing working with everybody on this important piece of work. Thanks very much for taking time to join today. I look forward to now hearing from our other speakers.
Thank you, Ian, for setting the context for this morning's session with that really insightful keynote address. Our second speaker today is Andrew Walker, the Interim Chief Executive of VSS. Andrew's been with the Victim Survivor Service since 2017 and has held a number of senior management positions within the service, gaining experience across the organisation and leading on a range of projects, including the Peace Programme delivery and also the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme. From January 2021, Andrew was Head of Service Development, responsible for strategic programme development and delivery, and being appointed Interim Chief Executive in August of this year. Thank you for joining us this morning, Andrew.
Thank you, Glenn, and good morning, everybody. I'm just going to share a presentation. Okay, so I'm going to give a bit of an overview this morning on the VSS Peace 4 project, taking a look back at the achievements, the outcomes, the challenges, and really reflecting on what has been a almost six year programme project supporting victims and survivors. Firstly, an introduction to VSS and who we are. So VSS was established in April 2012 as an arm's length body of the Executive Office, and our role is to provide support and services to victims and survivors of the Troubles and conflict. And that's a role described within the Victims and Survivors Strategy of 2009. And we also refer to the Victims Northern Ireland Order of 2006 in terms of who we're providing support to. So the VSS uses a needs-led service delivery model informed by co-design, consultation, by the policy advice that the Commission provides to ministers. And we listen and learn from victims and survivors and those who represent them. So we deliver services based on need and on a regional and community-led way. And we do that through two main programs, which are funded through the Executive Office. We have a victim support program, which is community delivery of services across 48 groups and organisations within Northern Ireland and elsewhere. And secondly, an individual needs program, which allows us to provide bespoke individual support packages, such as disability aids, education and training and other things, to individuals based on individual needs that have been assessed. And the Peace project and the programme has really played a key role in integrating that support and allowing through a network of health and wellbeing caseworkers that support to reach the widest possible number of people. Our vision, our mission, very simple vision to improve the health and wellbeing of victims and survivors, and that's what the project has been all about. Our mission, I won't go through in detail, but there are key elements there which really chime with the project that we have delivered in terms of partnership, connecting people with services on a community-led model. And our vision and mission really informs everything we do and all the decisions that we make in VSS. In terms of the project itself and the program call required us to recognise the need and demand of those who have suffered from trauma of conflict. And the program was to develop capacity for services to meet the needs of victims and survivors. And we have achieved that through two main elements of the program: health and wellbeing assessment with a target of 11,750 individuals supported, and advocacy with a target of 6,300. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail on each of those key elements a little bit later. The overall aim of the project was to improve the health and wellbeing of victims and survivors. And as you can see, that's very clearly aligned to our vision. And the project itself, £15 million over a period of 2017 through to the end of this year, 2022. In terms of the key priorities and main elements of the program and the project. So firstly, advocacy support, practical support for victims and survivors engaging with institutions, historical processes and inquiries. And I've mentioned the target of 6,300. Health and wellbeing, development of qualified assessors and health and wellbeing caseworkers to identify and address the needs of victims and survivors. So these are the two main elements. But in addition to that, a resilience program, which was to address the individual needs of victims and survivors, including a number of interventions. And that was one of the most interesting areas of the project, really, and allowed a lot of scope to do innovative and unusual things to support victims and survivors in areas such as social isolation, recording of lived experience, family therapy, and again, we'll pick up on those a little bit later. And finally, the development of capacity of the sector through two ways, really: training and development, and also through the research that Ian spoke about earlier. And we work with two key partners to deliver those two parts: the Commission for Victims and Survivors in terms of the research projects, and Wave Trauma Centre in terms of trauma training and education. In terms of the health and wellbeing caseworker network, which is one of the main elements of the project, this was a network of 26 health and wellbeing caseworkers embedded and employed by 11 of our community partners across Northern Ireland and in Great Britain. And I thought it would be useful just to understand how that network works and how that feels and looks to victims and survivors who are dealing with that support. So firstly, victims and survivors can present to VSS or to any of the 48 organisations that we support, and will be signposted and referred from there through to a health and wellbeing caseworker in one of the 11 organisations where the caseworkers were posted. That led to what we call an individual needs consultation, which is a guided conversation to identify the needs and anything that would be beneficial to the individual who is having that conversation. And a range of activities and interventions can be identified and delivered in the community following that individual needs consultation. Things like talking therapies, complementary therapies, welfare support, befriending, and the others, all available across a range of the 48 organisations that we support. Some of the needs may be what we call additional needs, maybe more complex, may require VSS to be more closely involved with the delivery of those individual interventions in areas such as trauma-focused physical activity, one-to-one adult literacy and numeracy, or disability aids. And the network allows the referral through to a VSS case manager to arrange for that more complex support to be provided. And finally, we measure the outcomes. It's crucial that we understand the difference that our interventions make to the lives of victims and survivors. So we're not simply counting the numbers and the beneficiaries, we're capturing how that has changed the lives of those who we support. In terms of advocacy, similar journey really, a victim and survivor signposted to one of the 6 organisations where the advocacy staff are posted. And the advocacy needs, again, identified in terms of the range of things that can be supported by those highly experienced and qualified advocacy support workers and managers. Support for individuals in relation to legal processes, inquests, inquiries, liaising with other organisations to access information, recording family reports. And of course, all of this can also be as part of a holistic approach. So health and wellbeing support alongside advocacy support where and when that is beneficial. Support provided, again, capturing the outcomes through case studies, reports, information coming back from the advocacy workers. So what have we achieved in terms of the overall project and how we've performed against those targets? In terms of health and wellbeing, 26 caseworkers in place across Northern Ireland, Ireland and GB, and 5 health and wellbeing case managers in VSS. So good coverage and the widest possible reach of casework. In terms of the target of 11,750 as at the end of June, very close to that target in terms of counting the numbers of individuals that have been supported, and no problem in meeting the target by the end of our project, which is at the end of November. In terms of advocacy, again, a good coverage of advocates across a number of organisations throughout the whole of the programme and project period. And this is one area where the target that we saw at the beginning of 6,300 did have to be revised during the programme period. The target was set based on Stormont House institutions, which were intended to be set up and available for the advocates to work with and engage with during this project. In the event that those institutions did not come into fruition, the work of the advocates had to pivot and change to support what the needs were of the individuals based on the environment that we found ourselves in. And that's resulted, I think, in a lower volume, but a more intensive work programme with the advocates. So staying with individuals for much longer through longer processes and cases to provide support over a longer period of time. In terms of the resilience programme, 4,000 plus resilience interventions across the areas that were both identified at the start of the project, and then other things that were added during the programme period. So this was one of the most important and interesting elements of the programme, really allowing us to pivot during the pandemic to support people with things like social isolation, both during the pandemic when people were unable to make those connections, and also as we came out of the pandemic and reconnecting with people, a really important part of the project. And in terms of training, 871 individuals trained across 218 courses. And that will really serve to increase the capacity and the standards of those working with victims and survivors, both now and into the future. So really worthwhile part of the project as well. We worked with, as I said, with 2 partners. Firstly, in terms of the research, the Commission for Victims and Survivors, and Ian has already covered the 4 projects, research projects, which were completed. So I'm not going to those in any more detail, but really useful for informing the strategy going forward. And our other partner, Wave Trauma Centre, in terms of education, trauma education and training, 4 key strands that were delivered by Wave. Firstly, community education training, so 406 participants there on short courses, things like Introduction to Trauma, for those who are going to be working with victims and survivors, either within the sector or in other aspects of life. Then 2 courses joined with other institutions, so linking with Queen's University Belfast to provide bursaries for 46 students to complete psychological trauma degree course, and then a postgrad certificate and diploma in trauma studies. That's an online course through University College Cork. And again, 33 students provided with bursaries to take part in that course of study. And in terms of citizen education, a really fantastic part of Wave's work, which sees victims and survivors bring their own lived experience into the classroom and present to students and raise awareness of victims' experiences and issues. Students who are going on to study medical courses, nursing courses, legal courses, where they're very likely to be engaged and come into contact with victims and survivors and issues flowing from that in their chosen studies. So some of the key challenges that we had throughout the project. Firstly, I suppose, as we touched on, one of the main areas in terms of advocacy was designed around engagement with the Stormont House institutions that were agreed in 2014, but did not come into fruition during the period of this programme. And that just meant that the Advocacy Support Network had to revisit the needs of the victims and survivors who wanted to engage with what was available and what was there and focus their efforts in those areas. COVID-19, of course, new ways of working, challenge, but also an opportunity. New ways of accessing training, new ways of accessing online therapies, new ways of staying connected and having social isolation addressed, And many of the things that have been a necessity during the COVID period in some form have remained and will remain going forward where they are useful and where they're meeting the needs of victims and survivors. And probably more technical point, the structure of the outputs within the project, when we talk about 11,750 individuals supported, that requires us to count individuals once. And what we have found is that the needs of victims and survivors evolve and change over time. And there's really excellent work by the caseworkers in continuing that journey with the individual, revisiting, having further conversations, identifying changes in needs and identifying ways to address those changes. We want to encourage that. The way the project was structured in terms of counting the targets didn't really encourage that, and that's something that we've learned from and we will feed into the next programme. And we need to just make sure that all of that good work is being reflected in the narrative of the project if it's not necessarily from the targets. In terms of the impact, what did we achieve with victims and survivors? So the overall aim was to improve support and services, and I think we've clearly achieved that from all of the work that we've captured and reflected. Establish a network of experienced, trauma-informed health and wellbeing caseworkers and advocacy support workers within the community. That's been achieved, and we've a really good reach amongst those two networks. And establish referral pathways. And this is really where we're at now, moving into the regional trauma network process. And the structures and the networks that have been put in place by Piece 4 is a big part of what will be the regional trauma network. So part of that already in place, and now making the connections through into statutory provision. In terms of training and trauma-informed practice, so significant training and lasting impact of the project in that area. And finally, the research projects, again, 4 projects which provided recommendations, which, as Ian mentioned, will inform the future strategy for victims and survivors, which will probably cover another significant period of time. So it's really important that in addition to capturing the outputs and the numbers of people who have been supported, we also look at the outcomes and how do we measure the change that those interventions have made to people's lives. We have a range of metrics across the different types of interventions that we provide, and these are some of the areas where we capture data and are able to report back on whether we're making a real change. Similarly with advocacy, a little bit more difficult. Metrics don't work quite in the same way in this area, reliant on case studies and on progress in individual circumstances, but often the advocacy support programme is delivered in a holistic way with wraparound support from the health and wellbeing caseworkers as well, so we can see the types of things that we capture there. And of course, we always capture lots of case studies and lots of information back from those who have availed of our services. It's great to hear all of the positive feedback that we receive very regularly on the services that we provide. And looking ahead, I suppose to Piece Plus, we need to ensure that the learning and experience of Piece 4, and we talked a little bit about how we capture the full benefit of the programme, is captured and put into the design of Piece Plus. So we're working closely with SEUPB as the programme is designed, and we have again been named as a lead partner, and our application will be put into SEUPB in the coming months. Again, I think we find ourselves in a similar position to 2016 in terms of advocacy, in that there are proposals for what may come in the next number of months and years, and the advocacy network within the Piece Plus programme will similarly have to be able to pivot and adapt to whatever is available to support individual victims and survivors in the way they would like to be supported, regardless of what the available environment is. And in terms of the health and wellbeing caseworkers, again, the regional trauma network will be a key element of support going forward, and therefore the Piece Plus programme will have a health and wellbeing caseworker network, which will be able to feed into that. So thank you. That was a brief overview of how Piece 4 has helped continue the support for victims and survivors. I hope that's been useful insight into what we've achieved over the last 6 years. I will pass you back to Glenn, if that's okay.
Great, thank you very much, Andrew. So at this point of the session, We'll now present some emerging findings from the impact evaluation relating to Action 3.3, victims and survivors. So I'll maybe just start by just giving you a bit of an oversight or an insight into the scope of our evaluation. So we've been asked to address 4 specific evaluation questions. Firstly, commenting on each objective and whether and to what extent the funded actions have contributed to the achievement of objectives. Secondly, assessing the impact of the programme as a catalyst for lasting change in promoting peace and reconciliation. Thirdly, identifying key lessons that can be learned to inform future investments in programmes. And fourthly, identifying the contribution of the programme to EU 2020 objectives and horizontal principles. In terms of outputs, we were reporting in 2019, 2020 and 2022, comprising 6 case studies per report and providing a deeper examination of project progress and the key lessons learned. However, we do acknowledge that this approach does have its limitations in its applicability to all projects. In relation to specific objectives, our evaluation included the actions highlighted in this slide. So including both actions within the Building Positive Relations theme, all 3 actions within shared spaces and services, and the local authority children and young people action within specific objective 2. The victims survivors theme falls under action 3.3 of the shared space and service objective and is our focus for the session today. So taking a closer look at this project we've just heard from Andrew about, it had an expected expenditure of 17.6 million euros and as of October 2022 has recorded an actual spend of 14.1 million. And as Andrew highlighted, the project itself aimed to try and establish that cross-border health and wellbeing services to try and increase the capacity and quality of care for victims and survivors and their families, and to build capacity in the community and voluntary sector in order to deliver treatment and support as part of a regional mental trauma service. The project was led by VSS and delivered in partnership with the Commission for Victims and Survivors and with Wave Trauma, while the Executive Office, the Department of Health, the Irish Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Cooperation and Working Together acted as advisory partners to the project. This table illustrates the vast quantum of support that's been delivered through this project, although I will note that I think Andrew's numbers are slightly more up to date than mine were, but this is what we had reported whenever we engaged with the project around March 2022. Whenever we were reaching out for that data, the advocacy support program at that stage had reached over 4,000 beneficiaries and was expecting to support a total of over 5,000 before the end of the project. The health and wellbeing casework network and the workforce training packages were expected to achieve and exceed their target outputs by the end of the project, with the former at March 2022 supporting over 1,000 beneficiaries, and the latter training over 650 individuals, not including those trained by Wave Trauma as well. At that point in March, the resilience programme had already exceeded its target of 3,000 interventions, delivering 4,000 interventions between the Peace 4 frameworks and through groups funding as well. The Research and Improved Regulation work package aimed to deliver 3 research projects and a needs-based review. And whenever we engaged with the project in March, they had delivered 2 research projects, the advocacy research and the transgenerational impacts research, and they had delivered that needs-based review. With the trauma services research project was underway and was due to be completed before the end of the project. So evaluating the impact that these work packages and the project as a whole has engendered in beneficiaries, we found that this project has allowed for the delivery of a more victim-centered and individual model where tailored support and advice has been provided by dedicated caseworkers. This has resulted in positive feedback from beneficiaries, with comments highlighting how the team were absolutely fantastic in terms of helping its beneficiaries. In relation to the resilience programme, it was specifically noted that the timing of the support was very apt, with the VSS able to deliver programmes focusing on social isolation throughout that period of lockdown and running outdoor activities in order to try and increase that engagement. We should note that the advocacy caseworker programme didn't progress as anticipated, which Andrew touched on, obviously due to the Stormont House Agreement institutions not materialising during the strategy period. However, and despite of that, the VSS caseworkers were able to take a more supportive role in terms of helping with things like information retrieval and emotional support. In relation to monitoring those impacts, we've noted the significant efforts that VSS have went to in terms of measuring their impacts. They've utilised a wide number of monitoring and evaluation methodologies in order to measure the clinical progress of participants across a range of its Piece 4 funded and non-Piece 4 funded interventions. And I'm going to point out a couple specifically because they're ones we're going to come on to in a moment. So there's the WSAS scores, which are work and social adjustment scale scores. So those are a client-centered self-report scale of functional impairment attributable to a specific identified problem. They've also used things such as the UCLA Social Isolation and Loneliness Framework, the CoreNet approach, and Take 5, which is a monitoring framework being delivered by the Victims Practitioners Working Group and the Belfast Strategic Partnership. So flicking on to just maybe look at some of those impacts. This table allows us to quickly identify the positive impacts that the resilience program has elicited. So we can see overwhelmingly positive results from this survey, with between 68% and 88% of beneficiaries reporting improvements in social isolation, trauma-focused physical activity, that one-to-one literacy and numeracy, and also in volunteering, all as a result of participating within this resilience program. And while the project has not yet fully delivered its target outputs due to those range of external factors, it has to date been able to achieve a considerable positive impact, both in terms of legacy and cross-border care for victims and survivors. Most notably, outcomes achieved due to the project include a path towards healing from the legacy of the Troubles through the direct engagement with victims and survivors. This is then reinforced by engaging in intergenerational work, ensuring that the legacy of the Troubles is addressed from a holistic, multi-generational perspective. And finally, by commissioning a needs analysis for the border region, it recognises and highlights the fact that the provision of social care for victims and survivors is an issue that stretches far beyond Northern Ireland. Through speaking with the project beneficiary, we were engaging with them to get their individual perspective of the programme and the impacts that have arrived. And they commented several times around the positive impact that the counselling offered through this programme has had on them. This impact was twofold. Firstly, through emotional support in dealing with past trauma experienced and creating ways to deal with it. And secondly, they noted that the counsellor, their health and wellbeing caseworker, was able to provide physical supports, such as obtaining mobility scooters and things like funding to purchase a new bed in order to help alleviate the pain that the beneficiary was suffering. So therefore, we can see that the support offered through the programs delivered is not only relevant to what the individuals need, but it also, the anecdotal evidence that we've received has elicited sort of the clear individuals that are coming to those individuals. So bringing this all back to those key evaluation questions that I mentioned at the start, we can see the strong evidence that the funded project has contributed significantly to the achievement of that Special Objective 3 shared space and services through the range of activity and the research that's been delivered. In relation to the programme acting as a catalyst, we can see that the activity undertaken to address the legacy of the past, including through intergenerational research, will continue directly promoting peace and reconciliation. And we can also see evidence that the activity delivered has been inclusive to those of all backgrounds, including targeting that cross-border needs through that research assignment that's been delivered. We have identified some areas of learning through this process, including, as Andrew touched on, in some cases where individuals require multiple interventions following the needs assessment from the health and wellbeing caseworkers. Future programmes should aim to deliver or develop processes and systems that can try to capture the impact of multiple engagements and interventions provided to the beneficiaries, as it might currently be underreported in terms of the range of support that's being delivered and offered. There were also difficulties in assessing which of the programs had the most impact or specific impacts. Therefore, consideration should be given to the evaluation of the holistic impact of interventions. Currently, the method of measuring impact is quite individual, looking at the individual projects and work packages. And we think there's work to be done in terms of joining up the client journey in terms of evaluation and looking at how different programs and interventions at different stages for a client deliver holistic impact. And furthermore, the last point I'd like to note is just that an online approach to monitoring and evaluation would help to make that data capture process easier and more effective. Okay. Thank you all for listening, and we've now come to the end of our sort of presentations. I would like to open the panel for discussion. So I'd like to invite our guest speakers from earlier in the session to come back on video. And just a reminder, if you'd like to submit any questions, please do that by going to slido.com and using the code at the bottom of the screen. Or if you have your phone handy, you can scan the QR code in itself. Perfect. In terms of questions, I can see we have a few that have already come in as we've been speaking. And I think I'll direct the first one towards yourself, Andrew. So there's a question to see how the service users are identified for that come to VSS. Are they approaching VSS directly themselves, or is it coming through referrals from another service such as GPs?
Yeah, I suppose there's 2 or 3 different ways that individual victims and survivors might become aware of VSS or might become aware of the groups. As I say, there are 48 organisations funded by VSS in the community, so you're never too far in Northern Ireland from an organisation that's there to support victims and survivors. So there's quite a presence in the community, and there will be visibility there for individuals who may either approach one of those organisations or already be members of those organisations. Separately to that, of course, any individual can approach VSS directly, and there are some things which make VSS a bit more visible. So we touched earlier on the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme, and I think individuals who are coming forward to make applications for that scheme will all be made aware that there is support available both in the community and within VSS. So there's a bit of signposting there as well. And I suppose finally, there is probably increasing awareness within GPs and in trusts, and that will grow as the regional trauma network takes off in the coming months, which will enable those who maybe don't have that awareness of what's available in the community but are speaking to their GP to be redirected through either via the trust or via VSS into the community support that's available. So a number of ways there really for an individual to become aware and connected with support.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Ian, I maybe direct this next question towards yourself. Intergenerational trauma is being increasingly discussed. Are you finding any evidence of this in your work as Commissioner?
Yes, I mean, some of it's anecdotal at the moment. You know, it's conversations with individuals or with families and so forth, where there is children and indeed grandchildren of people that have been involved and caught up within the conflict and the troubles. There is more work to be done in this whole area. We just concluded a sort of a 2-week roadshow of a project called The House, which takes the feelings of two houses on opposite communities, if you like, and it's a virtual reality experience that allowed young people in a school setting to talk about what was going on in that particular house, and it touched on a number of the issues the families impacted by the Troubles had. And it was interesting that, you know, for the majority of the kids it was a history lesson, but for some of the young people there was expressions of, I had no idea that's what has gone through my mum or my grandfather's head or whatever, and I can now understand some things. So it's addressing that. I think we've got really obvious cases where families are directly impacted. They've lost a loved one, and they are, we've seen that in the media, where they will continue to seek justice or whatever it may be. But then you've got the ones that don't really raise their heads an awful lot. They're simply living with it because maybe a parent or a grandparent has had an experience and they've buried that in some way. But it's something that's not talked about in the family. So it's one that we have to look at. And I think, as Andrew rightly says, as the regional trauma network starts to develop and greater awareness of that spreads, and we see more referrals in there, I think we'll start to see, and hopefully trap some data on that, on what that really means for us.
And Andrew, just from your perspective in terms of the delivery, what's been your experience of that intergenerational trauma on the ground?
I suppose that's an area that we have commenced some work on in the very later stages of the PEACE programme, and PEACE has given us the opportunity within that resilience piece to have some family therapy. So in addition to the normal counselling and talking therapies that we would have supported many people with, now starting to bring families together and to have therapy in that setting. And I suppose it'll be interesting to see, it's really been in the last number of months of the PEACE programme. So getting to the end of that, evaluating that, seeing what the uptake has been and the outcomes crucially will probably set us in good stead going forward. And again, something to think of for our PEACE Plus application.
As part of Ian's initial address, he had talked about the instability that's currently being experienced. Just wondering, Andrew, in terms of delivery of services on the ground, have you any specific examples of that instability and how that's impacted service delivery?
Well, I suppose, as referred to in the presentation, the instability around legacy and truth, justice and acknowledgement has led to an advocacy support network, which has had to be very flexible and agile in what they how they support individuals, the lack of clarity on what the longer term position is in terms of legacy. So that's clearly instability that's been there throughout, and appears to that it will be there again in our PEACE Plus programme. And we know that when there are events, anniversaries, comments in the media, proposals and how we do legacy, all of that has an impact on victims and survivors, and I suppose that can drive the need for further support and services on the ground and help in terms of health and wellbeing, support people when things like that are being developed and are happening. So yeah, we see the impact of that clearly.
There's a question just around, I suppose, the gaps or areas of need where potential activity in PEACE Plus could focus on. I think, Ian, in your address, you had mentioned, I suppose, 3 areas to focus on, or 3 key priorities. Were those priorities, I suppose, things that you think PEACE Plus could address? So I think you talked about, for example, the data requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all things that can underpin and underlie, really all good submissions. It's inevitable. It's something that we're learning from. I think the key area of the gap is still the unknown. It's the victims that don't engage. Andrew rightly highlighted that, there are many funded victims groups out there, and most people could, if they knew about them, could access to them. But we need to understand why people aren't accessing some of those groups, because I think if you take the total number of people that access that against the very best estimates of the number of people that are impacted by the troubles, there's a huge gap, and we need to understand whether that's good or bad. Because it could be, as I stated earlier, a good thing. They don't need to engage. They've worked out their own methods and own ways, or they've got the support in the family and so forth. So that's probably one of the biggest gaps in there, as well as continuing to make sure. I mean, we're genuinely, scratching the surface, I think, particularly with the engagement within both the Republic of Ireland and in GB in terms of the support there. There's been some fantastic work carried out by caseworkers there, but if you contrast that with the numbers of groups that we've got locally, there's a sharp contrast in there, and highlight those feelings of people feeling forgotten and so forth, and whether that's a victim or a family from the Monaghan bombings or from the Birmingham bombings, there's things there that we need to address within it all.
Andrew, I suppose from your perspective, is there anything that you've noticed since you've come into role as interim chief exec that you think should be a priority for VSS under PEACE Plus?
Well, in terms of PEACE Plus, it really will be maintaining those good networks of health and wellbeing casework and advocacy support. I suppose the more recent element of that is the connection of that network through to the regional trauma network as that goes live in the coming weeks and months. So that's going to be a key focus. Probably not within PEACE Plus, but more generally in terms of gaps, we're all aware that we need to do more for the bereaved. We have a very detailed and comprehensive scheme for the injured in terms of the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme, but it does highlight that there are obviously a lot of bereaved victims and survivors who don't have access necessarily to that scheme, and we need to reflect on what all of our service offering is for those people as well. So that's another key area. And the family therapy, which we will learn from the pilot, and clearly there could be a role within PEACE Plus for that element as well.
Thanks, Andrew. And you mentioned when you were talking through your presentation about the impact of COVID and the opportunities that can bring. I'm interested to know, I suppose, how COVID might have changed your thinking in terms of delivery approaches for Peace Plus, and if there's something that you are now, I suppose, thinking of doing differently compared to what was undertaken during Peace 4.
Well, I think it has given us opportunities to do different things or do things in different ways. And that doesn't mean that you completely pivot from how you delivered pre-COVID and do it completely differently going forward. But there is a measure of choice there. So we did find during COVID that the uptake of things like online talking therapies was probably much higher than we thought it would be. And credit to the organisations who put that in place really quickly and recognised that the need would still be there and the need would probably be greater during the challenges of COVID. And in many cases, individuals still like that as the way to engage and the way to link in with other support like social isolation and contact, and what might have been a befriending phone call in a pre-COVID world is maybe now a befriending Zoom call in post-COVID. So I don't think it's a matter of stopping how services were delivered previously and switching to a new model, but taking the best of both and providing that choice for people going forward. I think that's what we'll be trying to build into Peace Plus as well.
Ian, you mentioned about the range of research that the Commission's been undertaking. I'm just wondering, is there any research being undertaken at the moment which is just touching on, I suppose, how the needs of victim survivors might have just changed due to COVID, if it's had any impact in terms of, I suppose, the support and advice that's required from them?
No, I mean, there's no formal research specifically in relation to victims and survivors. There's a lot of research has looked at, how people are supported in general post the COVID side of things. But I think it is an area that we need to look at, because I think Andrew's spot on, is that there's an opportunity for a blended service delivery, to give it its titles, right across, that can be both cost effective. It can also, and I think this is the positive side, it can significantly support people that for whatever reason prefer to stay in the comfort of their own home, and to be able to reach out and provide services through what we have now all taken as sort of the norm on Zoom or Teams or what have you, could be a very, very good way to reach those people that would be reluctant to sit in larger groups or to just go down to their local centre and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think owing to time, I think we'll need to probably draw this Q&A session to a close. I would just like to thank Ian and Andrew for your time this morning. It's been very much appreciated and very insightful. And I'd like to, at this stage, pass it back across to Phil to provide some closing remarks just on this as our final Peace 4 session.
Yeah, thanks very much, Glenn. So, listeners on the call, you may be aware that today's session was the last of a series of online events we've held this week, examining the impact and lessons learned of the Peace 4 programme across a number of themes. This being the last one, it does mean that my list of thanks will be a little bit longer this time. Of course, I'd like to thank Ian Jeffers and Andrew Walker for their insightful, thoughtful and comprehensive presentations and responses today, as well as Glenn for guiding us through today's agenda. But this being the last event, I'd also like to thank Sarah Carlin, Nora Winder and Kira Kane, who, along with our AV company BNL, have done a fantastic job behind the scenes to make this week happen. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for attending this event and previous events during this week. I hope you're able to join us at future evaluation events across Peace and Interreg, and more details of these will be published on our website soon. So thank you very much. Goodbye.